Today I'm making this 1-hour honey whole wheat bread made with fresh milled flour.
Welcome y'all to Robin on the Farm. There's something really special about milling your own flour and making a homemade loaf of bread with it. It is deeply satisfying. So today I'm going to show you how I make this loaf of fresh milled flour honey whole wheat bread in just 1 hour. That's right, in just 1 hour you can make this delicious loaf of bread that's still soft and fluffy and just delicious. Definitely give this one a try. You are really going to like it.
I start by milling my grain. I mill 2 2/3 cups of wheat. That's 500 grams, and I get about 4.5 cups of fresh milled flour. The first ingredient is some water. I'm using 1.5 cups or 350 grams of lukewarm water. You want this to be about 100 to 110 degrees. That's the perfect temperature to activate your yeast, but not too hot to kill it. And our next ingredient is honey. I'm going to use 3 tablespoons or 56 grams of this honey. You can also use pure maple syrup. You can even use sugar if you'd rather do that. It is a little bit easier for cleanup if you do that. But I'm going to use this honey and it's going to make it really good. Now remember, different honeys have different flavors. Some can be bitter, some can be sweet. So it is going to flavor your bread. Make sure you have a honey that you like. After our sweetener, now we're going to add some oil. Today I'm going to go with this coconut oil. I'm going to use 3 tablespoons or 36 grams of oil. Now you can use any kind of oil that you want. You can also use melted butter. That works great in this recipe too. Oil will give you a little bit more of a moist bread. Now it's time to add our yeast. I'm going to use 1.5 teaspoons or 5 grams of yeast. I'm going to use the SAF instant yeast, but you can also use active dry, rapid rise. Any kind of yeast will work just fine in this recipe. 5 grams or 1.5 teaspoons right on into your mixing bowl. Now it's time for the star of the show, the fresh milled flour. I milled up some hard winter white wheat because I have a lot of it, but you can also add some kamut, spelt, einkorn. Any of those would be a great combination for this bread. But I'm going to add 4.5 cups of my fresh milled flour, which is 500 grams. The next 2 ingredients are totally optional, but I feel like they make my fresh milled flour breads way better. First, I'm going to add some vital wheat gluten. I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons or 4 grams of this vital wheat gluten. I've used lots of different brands of vital wheat gluten, and they're all just about the same. I like to keep mine in the freezer, and it stays good forever. The next ingredient is also totally optional. This is dough enhancer. Sometimes it's called dough conditioner. Both of these will give you a better bread, a better rise, a better texture, a smoother texture, less crumble, so that's why I like using these. I keep this one in my freezer too, and it stays good for a really long time. I'm using 1.5 teaspoons or 5 grams of this dough enhancer. And our very last ingredient for our 1-hour fresh milled flour bread is salt. I'm using 1.5 teaspoons or 9 grams of salt. I love this Redmond's real salt. It's definitely my salt of choice in all of my baking, but you can use any salt that you have. Now that all of the ingredients are in the mixing bowl of my mixer, I'm going to go ahead and get this Bosch to work. I'm going to let this knead for 8 minutes on speed 2. And I'm also going to check on my dough just in a couple minutes and make sure it's not looking too wet. You want it to look like this. If it was sticking really bad to the sides or to the bottom, you'd want to add a little bit more fresh milled flour. My dough has been kneading for 8 minutes. Now when I make this 1-hour bread, I don't worry about looking for a window pane. You can if you want, but I don't. I don't even worry about it, and the bread turns out great. So check out this dough. It's tacky, not too sticky. You can stretch it. That means that it has really good gluten development, and it's ready to shape into a loaf. While I'm shaping my loaf, I like to turn my oven on to 350 degrees just for 1.5 minutes, and then I turn my oven off. This will provide a really nice warm place for my dough to rise in the loaf pan. I'm going to bake this 1-hour bread in one of my cast iron loaf pans. I love my cast iron loaf pans. They're one of my very favorite things. This is an 8.5 by 4.5 inch cast iron loaf pan. I oiled it up really well. I use the coconut oil, but I usually use olive oil to oil up the sides and the bottom and the corners, and then your bread won't stick at all. So to shape this loaf of bread, I like to press it out really well, Get all those little air bubbles out of it. I like to get it about as wide as my loaf pan is long so that it takes up my whole loaf pan. Then I'm just going to really simply roll it into a log shape. You want it nice and tight. You'll get really good texture to your bread. That'll give you really good surface tension so you'll get a nice domed loaf. And then I like to pinch the seams together and the ends, give it a nice pat, and then I'm just going to throw it into my loaf pan. That is all it takes. Now I'm going to let this dough rise in the loaf pan for exactly 20 minutes. I'm going to turn off my oven now that's nice and warm and put this in there, and it'll rise in a nice warm place, and that'll speed up the rise. It's been 20 minutes and look how well this dough has risen. Now I'm preheating my oven to 350 degrees, and then when it's preheated, I'm going to put this loaf in there to bake at 350 degrees for 30 minutes. Our 1 hour fresh milled flour honey whole wheat bread is fresh out of the oven. Look how good this looks. Now what I like to do is right out of the oven, I like to turn it out of my loaf pan. That'll keep it from getting soggy or too wet on the bottom if it sits in the loaf pan a little bit too long. Now let's admire this beautiful loaf of bread. Isn't it a beautiful color? And look at that rise. All from a loaf of bread that only took 1 hour to make. Homemade bread can be healthy and delicious, and it doesn't have to take all day. Now what I like to do once I get my bread out of the loaf pan is I like to melt a little bit of butter in my cast iron melting pot, and I like to brush my crust with it. This will give you a really good soft crust, that pretty shine, and a really good buttery flavor. Now instead of cooling my bread on a rack, I like to wrap my bread in a tea towel and let it cool. That warmth, the condensation will give you an even softer crust. If you can stand it, let your bread totally cool before you slice into it, and you'll get a better crumb, better texture out of your sliced bread. I've let my bread cool off just for a little bit, but it's still warm and I am ready to slice into this bread and eat some. I love this fresh milled flour bread, and I have got to eat some with some peanut butter. So let's go ahead and slice into this. I like to use my bread bow knife. You won't squish your bread as you're trying to slice into it. Now, like I said, I haven't totally let mine cool, so if you let yours cool, you're going to get an even better texture and crumb out of your bread, but this looks gorgeous. This is 1 hour bread. This is pretty amazing, especially for whole wheat bread. I wish that I could let each of you sample some of this, because this bread is absolutely phenomenal. It's delicious, it's wholesome, it's healthy, it fills you up, and it makes you feel so good. This is definitely on constant rotation in my home, and I feel good feeding this to my family. This bread has a rich, nutty, complex flavor. It's full of vitamins and minerals, full of protein. It has a nice moist crumb, doesn't have any preservatives. It is good homemade bread at its best. I hope you'll give this recipe a try. I'll leave the printable recipe down in the description. I'll leave a recipe for 1 loaf and for 2 loaves, and I'll leave it in cups and spoons and in grams. I'll also leave a link to our homemade beeswax bread bags if you're looking for a good way to store your bread without any plastic. This recipe also makes fantastic 1 hour fresh milled flour rolls. Be sure to check out that video too, and I'll show you exactly how to make them. Thanks so much for being here with me on Robin on the Farm. I'll see you next time.
Robin's in the kitchen, dough beneath her hands, wheat from the fields and eggs from her land. Sunlight through the window, a warm golden glow. She's working hard to make that dough. With flour on her apron, loving each knead, ground